We have a short little thing on uranium from Yarrow, and then haiku.
Hearing the story that was shared about uranium reminded me of an interesting fact that I had read that came from a book that's called Uranium, Mining and Mill Wastes, an Introduction. And there were some interesting numbers in there that kind of put into perspective just how much blasting and destroying of the earth that needs to be done before the uranium can even be processed. So just bear in mind too, anytime any politician or public official from the nuclear industry tries to tell you that nuclear energy is a clean fuel source, perhaps you could remind them of the extensive refining and transportation of heavy rock matter that has to be done in order to get these rock fuel materials. So in uranium mining, one of the most common types of mining that's done nowadays is a form that's called open pit mining. And in order to do this, a group of people has to go in and totally ravage these ore fields where the uranium could be found. And this is an extremely volume-intensive process where they have to blast something like, let me check my notes here, something like 500,000 tons of what they call waste rock to get 25 tons to get 0.1% to 0.2% of that 500,000 tons is uranium. So out of 500,000 tons of rock, only 0.1 to 0.2% of that is going to be any type of uranium that they could then refine. They need 25 tons of this uranium to fuel one reactor for 1 year. Also in this process, they end up getting 100,000 tons of mill tailings, and that's these substances which contain a lesser quality uranium, thorium, radon-220. They emit radon-222 gas, and these mill tailings and these waste rock piles just end up getting abandoned out wherever they end up taking them in these sludge pits. They also create all of this liquid waste, which they treat with the same regard. So, with the predictions of the nuclear industry, we need something like 50 million tons of radioactive residues of these mill tailings and waste rocks would be created every year by 2020 if we continue on this same path that politicians in the nuclear industry are projecting to supply just a small fraction of their projected plants that they would like to see on grid. 50 million tons of this radioactive slop, which they would then just abandon. And when they say nuclear fuel is a cheap fuel, they're lying, and they're not calculating in a huge percentage of the whole process that it takes to refine these substances.
Haiku?
Yeah, I was going to give throw some poetry in, but do a retrospective on the nuke business, of course, and it is a business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, and PG&E, of course, the relicensing of Diablo Canyon, that makes more than half of their profits. But when we talk about profits, we have to go back to Edward Teller, okay? He was the guy who did all the big-time lobbying for this in the 50s. And, of course, Glenn Secord, who discovered plutonium. And what happened in the 70s, I was involved in the movement in the 70s. Of course, the Vermont Yankee had been on. But there was a place in Seabrook. It was out on an estuary somewhat similar to this, and on Highway 1, which is the scenic route, goes up to Maine, etc. You can go into the town of Seabrook, and you can see a thrift store, a Dunkin' Donuts nowadays, I guess, a nuclear power plant, and then another thrift store. But what happened was there were several occupations. This was during the reign of Jimmy Carter, of course, worked on a nuclear submarine himself in the Navy. But what happened with him was, or well, he was for nukes, even past the Navy. But what happened here was this group called Boston Commonwealth was funding this Seabrook. And so there were several occupations. The significant occupation is when 2,000 people walked onto the site, the actual site of the Seabrook nuke, and the governor, Meldrum Thompson, decided to arrest everybody and put people in armories, 8 different armories, for about a week. And so that brought up the Boston Globe. And that brought a focus for the first time to nuclear energy as a movement. And a couple of years later was 3 Mile Island. But in between that, the last occupation of Seabrook, was, of course, was in 1980. And these were hotly contested issues. And the denial was so great that when you went pamphleting in Hampton Beach, which was a beach town, people would deny it even existed, even though you could show the place. But what happened, right in the distance, you know, so what happened was in the 70s, of course, they were going to build 100 nukes, okay, and they never got to do these things after 3 Mile Island. The initial investments, of course, are billions of dollars. This is why Barack O is throwing out the $50 billion in the loan or not so loan deal, because the government will always cover for these people. And you can look at the issues. For example, right now this plant is being decommissioned to Idaho on the road, and they're going to this place called U.S. Ecology. And Verbena talked about the occupation I was at the occupation of Ward Valley for a year or so. And the same company, U.S. Ecology, was building the waste dump. They were putting everything in just a steel barrel, but the tribes down there rose up against it. And through the occupation, which they never got, it was outside of Needles, about 20 miles north outside of Needles, and it was on the budget when Clinton was president. We're floating up to the 9th. Clinton was president. It was a attachment to the budget by a congressman named Jerry Lewis, who's still a Republican down there, has the name of the entertainment, a conservative Republican. But Clinton never signed it. And Gingrich, that's when they shut down the government. If Clinton had signed that, that waste dump would exist now. And this is the company where that's trucking this out now. So this is what you're dealing with. This is an interconnected series. The other nukes in this, of course, this is closed down because of the fault line, but when you go down the Diablo Canyon, they've just found another fault there, what is it, a couple of years ago. So you're dealing with that, and they want to be relicensed now. All the calls, if you want to do something, call them up and say, hey, don't relicense Diablo, because of the fact that they say, well, we're not going to go for it now, we're going to refit it. And I hung out with the Chumash down there. We did runs up to the plant with the flame from Hiroshima and Nagasaki to prevent it. But this is an illusionary power system. It makes big bucks for the people that push it out. It's highly toxic. And of course, today is the day of Chernobyl. And when we look at what's happened there in the dead zone that exists today, and all the stuff that's happened around the world, and we go to Japan. So this makes it a real interesting issue, because this is happening now. There are 3 reactors in Japan that are going down, okay? One of them's on the verge of a meltdown. Reactor 1, Reactor 2 has a hole in it, and Reactor 3 is going out to sea. So this is, you want timely issues, this is it. And I think that I'll throw in a couple of poems here. That one that I did in the Mojave Land when we stayed there at the encampment was really interesting. I went from here, I was working on the headwaters, but I went from here because we were camping on BLM land. It was really interesting. We were camping there to get busted, and so the Indians were behind us, and everybody else wasn't. And they didn't want to mess with it, okay? So that was whenever you do an occupation, you go right to the site itself, because there's no more powerful place to be. And one of the poems I did for the Mojave, I gave it to them for Christmas. It's called In Mojave Land, Loving the Openness of a Live Desert, Bluest Skies, Not So Distant Mountains, Feeling the Honesty of Afternoon Breezes, Blowing whichever way they please. And another big nuke issue that happened here, of course, was in the desert. Every Easter, we just had Easter here. Of course, Easter is Astra. It's the pagan goddess of spring. But she's not viewed as that when the Christians took her over. But one of the things that used to happen there with Bill Rossi and Corbin Harney on Easter weekend, you'd start on the Strip in Vegas and go out to the test site in 3 days. You would end up there on the resurrection, and then you would cross the line and get put in a cage. And one of the people that used to do this was Martin Sheen. He had become an activist. He's the father. He was in the Coppola's movie, what was the name of it?
Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now. So we were in a cage, and I said to him, "Is this like the cage you were in when you were in the movie?" And so he was, there were people that were, and eventually Clinton decided not to do the above-ground testing, but nuclear stuff has always haunted this country. It has never been, all the other bad karma, including Fort Humboldt and everything else here that was part of the imperialism, the occupation. Nuclear has always been there. It's always been this sleeping boogeyman that isn't asleep. You know, it's something that people have denied, and they have continued to invest in, and they have stopped investing. And I think the most we can hope for now is to keep Obama from appeasing any of these people, okay, or continuing on with whatever it is. And I'll do a few haikus now, and a lot of it will be for the last one will be for the, well, the first one will be for the people of Japan because of what they're going through. And I did it the other day, and it's snowflakes fall on cherry blossoms, nuke melts down. I'll do something a little more upbeat. The kindness of spring has come to bring everything back to life again. And I'll do the one, express joy, beyond happiness, peaceful bliss.
Thank you, Haiku. Oh, yeah, a reminder, if you'd like to speak, come see me, and I'll just put you on the list.